I was kneeling on my kitchen floor, unwrapping my grandma's china, when a stranger's voice on the phone told me the one thing I never thought I'd hear about the man I married. "I saw them together," he said. "Your husband and his mom. Don't say a word to him. Just come. Come alone." I stood up so fast I nearly dropped the teacup in my hand. Through the doorway I could see them, my husband Mark, up on a ladder hanging a picture frame, and his mom Linda directing him like a general. They were laughing. Like any normal Tuesday afternoon. And in that 1 second, staring at the two people I trusted more than anyone else on earth, I felt the floor of my whole life tilt sideways. Stay with me, because what I found in that house over the next 2 weeks is something I still can't fully believe happened to me. By the end, I want you to tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my shoes? Drop your city and what time it is where you're watching, because I read every single one. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 34. And 14 days before that phone call, I signed the papers on the house of my dreams. Let me back up, because you need to understand what that house meant to me. I grew up outside Columbus, Ohio, the only daughter of a man named Robert Carter. Everybody called him Bob. My dad wasn't rich. He ran a little furniture repair shop out of our garage for almost 30 years, teaching me how to sand wood until it felt like silk under your palm. He never made much money, but he never once complained about the life it gave him. When he passed 2 years ago, he left me almost everything. And when my husband Mark and I finally found a house we loved, a 2-story craftsman with a wraparound porch and a backyard begging for a vegetable garden, it was my dad's money that made it possible. I remember standing in the empty living room the day we closed, sunlight pouring through the bay window, thinking, "Dad, look what you gave me." I was 34 years old, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had something permanent. Something no one could take from me. I had no idea how wrong I was. It was a Tuesday, 2 weeks after closing. Boxes still lined our hallway, the smell of fresh paint still hanging in the air. I was unpacking my grandma's wedding china when my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. "Mrs. Carter? This is Walter Higgins. I sold you the house." I remembered him right away, a soft-spoken man in his 70s, retired from 30 years as an electrician, hands that shook slightly when he shook mine at closing. "Mr. Higgins, is everything okay?" Paused so long I thought the call had dropped. "I need to apologize for something," he finally said. "When my wife and I put in the smart home system years back, we installed a security camera in the living room. I thought I'd disconnected all of them before you moved in. I missed one behind the built-in bookshelf still linked to my cloud account." My stomach tightened, though I couldn't have told you why yet. "I only found out because I got a storage full notification," he continued. "I went to delete the footage and—" "Mrs. Carter, I think you need to see this for yourself." "See what?" "Just tell me." "I'd rather not say it over the phone. I've saved everything onto a drive." His voice dropped, careful, protective. "Please come see me. And don't say anything to your husband yet. Just come alone." I told him I would, then hung up before I could ask another question, my hands already shaking. I set the phone down and looked through the doorway at Mark and Linda, laughing about something I hadn't caught. Mark turned, caught my eye, and gave me that same easy grin that had pulled me in 11 years ago, back when I was still grieving my mom, and he showed up saying all the right things at exactly the right time. "You okay?" he asked. "You look pale." "Fine. Just need some paint for the guest room." The lie came out so smooth it scared me. Linda glanced at me, her eyes lingering half a second too long, like she was quietly measuring me against some ruler I'd never meet. "Take your time, dear," she said. "We'll finish up here." I sat behind the wheel a full minute before trusting myself to turn the key. Maybe it's nothing, I told myself. But some part of me already knew, the way you know a storm's coming before the sky turns. The way Linda had insisted on being at every walkthrough. The way both of them had gotten a little too comfortable, a little too fast in a house my dad's money was holding up. I looked once in the rearview mirror at my house, golden in the late afternoon light. I didn't know yet I was driving straight toward the moment that would end my marriage. I only knew I had to see it with my own eyes. If this is giving you chills, hit that like button. It only gets heavier from here. Walter's new place was a modest rental across town, tidy and quiet, the kind of home that belongs to a man who's spent his whole life being careful. He opened the door before I even knocked, like he'd been watching for my car, and the look on his face told me this wasn't the misunderstanding I'd hoped for. He led me to a small kitchen table where a laptop sat open, waiting. I sat down, hands cold despite the warm afternoon. "I want you to understand something first," he said. "I'm not a man who goes looking for other people's business. I built that camera system myself, mostly so my wife would feel safe when I traveled for work. I thought I'd disconnected every one before the sale. I missed the one behind the bookshelf." He paused. "I watched it before I called you. I couldn't, in good conscience, delete it without showing you first." "Show me," I said, because I couldn't stand the waiting anymore. He turned the laptop toward me and pressed play. The footage was time-stamped from 4 days earlier, a Friday afternoon when I'd been at my office until almost 7. The angle looked down over my living room, still half-furnished, boxes stacked along one wall. I watched Mark let himself in. A moment later, Linda followed, glancing around the room the way a person looks at something they're already picturing as their own. "She still thinks this house belongs to both of you," Linda said on the recording, settling onto the arm of the sofa, her voice carrying that particular blend of warmth and steel I'd heard my entire marriage. "Sweet girl. She never reads the fine print." Mark laughed, the same easy laugh I'd fallen for 11 years ago. "She trusts me. Why would she read the fine print? I'm her husband." "That trust is useful," Linda said. "As long as we use it correctly." Something cold settled into my chest. They kept talking. Linda mentioned a broker she knew personally, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. Mark mentioned my dad's inheritance had covered almost 70% of the down payment, and Linda said it was a shame money like that hadn't been structured better from the start. They talked about a power of attorney clause buried in a stack of documents that would let ownership shift gradually, quietly, legally, without a single dramatic confrontation. "She won't notice," Mark said. "She never notices these things. She trusts me with all of it." I sat frozen at Walter's kitchen table, watching my husband describe my trust like a resource to manage, and I understood with a clarity that felt almost physical that the man who held my hand at my dad's funeral and the man on that screen were somehow impossibly the same person. The footage ran another few minutes. I watched Linda walk through my kitchen, opening cabinets, saying the layout would be so much better for entertaining once a few walls came down. I watched Mark nod along the way he always nodded along with his mom, a habit I used to find sweet. Now I understood it for what it really was. Walter closed the laptop gently, like closing it too fast might hurt me further. "I copied everything onto a drive," he said, sliding a small USB stick across the table. "Every angle, every date. I don't know what's going on in your marriage, Mrs. Carter, and it's not my place to guess. But a house holds people accountable to nothing except what actually gets documented. I thought you should have this before anyone decides to erase what really happened inside those walls." I picked up the drive. It was barely the weight of a house key, and yet it felt like it might tip the whole foundation of my life. "Thank you," I whispered. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "My wife and I made a home in that house. I'd hate to think of someone taking that same chance away from another family through a lie." He walked me to the door and just before I stepped into the fading light, said one more thing, quiet, almost like a warning. "You still have time, Mrs. Carter. Whatever you decide, you still have time to do it right. If you're new here, hit subscribe. This story is about to take a turn you will not see coming. Comment your city below. I want to know where this is reaching tonight." I drove home with the USB drive tucked into my coat pocket, my hand resting over it at every red light like it might disappear if I let go. Somewhere on that drive I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. Not until I understood exactly how deep this went. I walked back into my house that evening and became someone else. Not a different woman, just a quieter version of myself, one who'd learned in a single afternoon that the safest place to keep the truth was behind a closed door in my own chest. "How was the paint store?" Mark asked, not even looking up from a box of kitchen utensils. "Busy. I'll go back tomorrow." He nodded, satisfied. That was the end of it. Over the following days, I started watching my husband like a stranger. Mark handled every piece of mail that came through our box, calling it just easier this way. Linda, who now visited nearly every other day under the guise of helping us settle in, always somehow beat me to the mailbox before I got home. Their conversation shifted the second I walked into a room, not stopping exactly, just softening, rerouting like water finding a different path around a rock. None of it on its own meant anything. Together it meant everything. I need to tell you about someone I haven't mentioned yet. My best friend since college, Sarah Mitchell, a paralegal downtown. 3 days after my visit to Walter's house, she was the first person I called. We sat in her car outside a coffee shop, and I played her the footage with my hands shaking so bad she had to hold the phone steady for me. When it ended, Sarah went quiet, then said, "Emily, this isn't the first time I've heard something like this." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "You remember Mark's ex, Danielle? I ran into her a couple years ago. She mentioned, kind of offhand, that she'd almost bought a condo with Mark before they broke up, and that his mom got really involved in the financing at the last minute. I never thought about it again until now." I felt the room tilt a second time. It wasn't just me. This might have happened before. "Find her," I said. "I need to know if I'm right." Sarah did, a short, cautious call between two women comparing notes on a family they thought only they'd known. Danielle confirmed it. A refinance, a power of attorney clause, a fireplace mantel Linda had already picked out. She'd walked away before signing, never fully understanding why Mark's warmth had turned so cold. That was the moment I stopped thinking of this as a one-time mistake. This was a pattern. And I was not going to be the second name on that list. Comment one word for me: protected. 'Cause that's exactly what I was about to become. I found attorney David Turner the way most people find lawyers when they're afraid to ask anyone they know. A late-night search on my phone, brightness turned all the way down so the light wouldn't wake Mark beside me. Real estate attorney, 24 years of practice, reviews that used words like discreet and relentless. His office was small, tucked above a bakery on a quiet street. He was maybe 60, silver at the temples, with the unhurried calm of a man who'd heard every version of the story I was about to tell him. I brought everything: the USB drive, Sarah's notes on Danielle's call. He watched the footage in silence, pausing to write on a legal pad. When it ended, he sat back and looked at me. "Mrs. Carter, I'll be direct. This isn't a routine refinance. If that power of attorney clause gets signed and notarized, it gives your husband broad authority over decisions tied to the property. Not total control right away, but enough scaffolding that, over time, he could refinance again, borrow against the equity, or sell it without you actively participating in every step. It's built to be signed by someone who trusts the person handing it to them and doesn't read past the first paragraph. So, it's legal. On paper. That's what makes it dangerous. The law generally assumes if you sign something, you understood it. Your only real protection is not signing, and making sure they can't quietly force the issue another way. Can they? Not if we move fast. He tapped his pen against the pad. I can file protective measures today: a notice of interest, updated deed language, a formal record naming you the sole party with authority to approve any transfer or lien on the property. Any transfer would then require your personal, verified appearance and independent legal review. In plain terms, I'm building a wall around your house that only you can open. Relief moved through me, fast and dizzying. But underneath it sat something harder. "I want more than a wall, Mr. Turner," I said. "I want them to understand exactly what they tried to do. I want it documented. undeniable. Then we do this carefully, he said. Continue exactly as you have been. Don't refuse to sign, don't confront them. Let them believe they're close to finishing what they started. The more comfortable they get, the more they'll say, and the more they say, the stronger your position becomes. I'll file everything necessary so nothing actually transfers, no matter what happens at that table. I left his office with a folder of my own, carbon copies of every filing he promised to submit that week. Tell me honestly, could you have kept that smile on your face at dinner every night, knowing what you knew? It worked better than I expected. Within 2 days, Mark's demeanor shifted from cautious to comfortable, the tightness in his jaw completely gone. He started talking more freely at dinner about a future home office in the basement. Linda, sensing victory, started arriving with paint swatches and furniture catalogs, holding fabric samples against my walls with the confidence of a woman decorating a house she already considered hers. I watched them build their comfort like a house of cards and said nothing to disturb it. Every night after Mark fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, reading through the refinance folder line by line, photographing each document before putting it back exactly where he'd left it. I opened a new email account under a name that meant nothing to anyone but me and forwarded copies there. I kept a small voice recorder in my cardigan pocket during family dinners, replaying them later in my car during lunch 3 blocks from my office. I built a folder of my own, a shadow archive invisible to them, growing heavier every day. It was on the 5th night that I found the clause that changed everything. Buried on page 14, in language dense enough to be skimmed right past, was a provision granting Mark limited power of attorney over matters related to the property, framed as something meant to streamline future paperwork. I read it 3 times to be sure. It wasn't a refinance, or rather it was one wrapped around something else entirely. A legal key that, once turned, would let Mark make decisions about my house, my dad's money, my future, without ever needing to ask me again. I sat very still in the dark kitchen, thinking about something my dad used to tell me. The fastest way to lose something valuable isn't theft, it's trust handed to the wrong person, without ever checking where it landed. I closed the laptop and let myself smile, small, grim, alone in the dark. They thought I was about to sign away my future. I was about to make sure I never lost it at all. On a Thursday evening, Linda mentioned almost casually that she knew a notary who could come right to the house. So much easier, dear. I let a beat of hesitation pass, then smiled. Monday. Let's do Monday. I'll have the whole weekend to feel settled about it. Linda's face lit up with something close to triumph. Mark squeezed my hand and I let him, because I understood I was no longer the woman standing in the way of his plan. I was the woman closing the trap around it. The days between Thursday and Monday stretched strange and thin. Mark hummed while making coffee. Linda arrived nearly every afternoon, tape measure in hand, murmuring about where a sectional might go once we open up this space a little. On Friday, Mark talked about renovations with an openness he'd never shown before, knocking down the kitchen wall, maybe a wet bar for his college buddies. Once the paperwork's finalized, there's more room to make moves, he said, refilling his wine glass. Saturday brought Linda in full force, rearranging my pantry for better flow, announcing the fireplace mantel would need replacing, talking about my house like a woman who already owned it outright. It was Sunday night, the night before the scheduled signing, that gave me the one piece of evidence I hadn't even known I was still missing. Mark found me at the sink, wrapping his arms around my waist in a gesture so familiar it almost made me forget everything I knew about him. He kissed the side of my head and murmured, thinking he was speaking only to a woman who trusted him completely. Once everything's transferred, he said, you won't even have to think about any of this again. You'll just wake up and it'll all be handled. That's the whole point. I want to protect you from all this stress. I kept my hands moving in the soapy water, my breathing even. In my cardigan pocket, the small recorder caught every word. That sounds nice, I said, soft and grateful. Only I knew what those words actually were. A full, unguarded confession from a man so certain of his victory he no longer felt any need for caution. If you've made it this far, comment ready, Monday's here, and what happens next is the moment this whole story has been building toward. Monday morning, I met David one last time in a coffee shop parking lot 3 towns over. He confirmed every filing was complete and ready the moment it was needed. "Are you ready for tonight?" he asked. "I've been ready," I said, "since the night I watched that video." That evening, I came home to find Mark setting the dining table with unusual care. The good plates, the candles we'd never once used, a bottle of wine clearly chosen for the occasion. Linda arrived shortly after, dressed like it was a small celebration. "A little dinner before the signing," Mark said, pulling out my chair. "You deserve something nice, given how understanding you've been." I sat down at the table my dad's money had helped build, across from the 2 people who'd spent weeks quietly planning to take it from me, and raised my glass when Mark toasted. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes warm. "To new beginnings," I echoed, meaning something entirely different by it than he did. Neither of them noticed how often I glanced toward the front door, counting the minutes, knowing a car was already on its way, carrying a man who'd arrive before dinner ended and change everything they thought they'd already won. Dinner unfolded exactly as Mark had planned it. I laughed in the right places, ate very little, my stomach too tight with anticipation, but no one seemed to notice. When the plates were cleared, Mark reached into the sideboard drawer and pulled out the folder, setting it on the table with a gentleness that almost looked like reverence. He opened it to the final page, smoothed it flat with his palm, and slid a pen across the tablecloth toward me. "No rush," he said, though his eyes said otherwise. "Whenever you're ready." Linda leaned forward slightly, her wine glass forgotten in her hand, watching the pen the way you watch the last few seconds before a firework goes off. I picked it up, feeling the weight of everything the last 2 weeks had asked of me. The silence, the fake smiles, the nights spent awake with a recorder in my pocket and a heart full of grief for the marriage I thought I had. I lowered the pen toward the signature line. The doorbell rang. Comment, "Oh my God, if your heart just dropped. Mine sure did, and I was the one living it." Mark's head snapped up, irritation flickering across his face. "We're not expecting anyone," he said, glancing at his mom, who shook her head, equally confused. "I'll get it," I said, setting the pen down without signing a single letter. I opened the door to find David Turner standing on the porch in a gray suit, calm and unhurried, a leather folder under his arm. Behind him stood a uniformed court officer holding a small stack of documents. "Good evening, Mrs. Carter," David said. His voice pitched perfectly for the moment, professional, unbothered, which somehow made it land harder than if he'd shouted. "I believe this is a good time." I stepped aside and let them in. Mark rose so fast his chair scraped hard against the floor. "What is this?" His eyes moved from David to the officer to me, the first tremor of a man realizing the ground beneath him was no longer solid. "Emily, what's going on?" I walked back to my seat and sat down, folding my hands in front of me, calm, deliberate, a woman fully in possession of herself. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," David said, "I'm here on behalf of my client, Emily Carter, to formally notify you that this property has been legally protected against unauthorized transfer, refinancing, or lien. Any documents requiring her signature for such purposes are void as of today." The court officer placed his documents on the table beside Mark's folder, one stack representing the future they'd planned, the other quietly dismantling it. Linda's face had gone pale. "This is absurd," she snapped. "This is our family's home. Mark has every right. Mark has whatever rights are granted to him under the law, and under any agreement Emily willingly and knowingly enters into," David said evenly. "Neither applies here." Then, one by one, he laid out the evidence I'd spent 2 weeks gathering, transcripts of the security footage, screenshots of the refinance documents with page 14 circled in red, copies of emails between Linda and the mortgage broker, and finally the voice recorder, which David pressed play on, filling the dining room with Mark's own voice from the night before. "Once everything's transferred, you won't even have to think about any of this again. You won't even realize how it happened." Mark's face drained of color. Linda sat frozen, staring at the recorder like it had betrayed her personally. "How long have you known?" Mark asked, stripped of his earlier confidence, almost pleading. I looked at him, really looked, searching one last time for some trace of the man who'd held my hand at my dad's funeral. Long enough, I said. The words hung in the room, and I watched something in Mark's expression finally break. Not surprise, not even anger, just the slow, sinking understanding of a man who never once considered the woman across the table might be watching him just as carefully as he'd been watching her. We're so close to the end. Comment Team Emily if you've stuck with me this long. For a long moment, no one at the table moved. Mark finally found his voice, smaller than I'd ever heard it. Emily, this isn't what it looks like. I was just trying to make things easier for both of us. You've always hated dealing with paperwork. You were trying to handle it, I repeated quietly, so completely that I'd have needed your permission to make decisions about my own house. He had no answer for that. Linda straightened in her chair, composing herself with the same brittle dignity she wore at every family gathering. This is a misunderstanding born of overcaution, she said, addressing David. We were simply trying to streamline the family's financial planning. Mrs. Carter, David said, using my name deliberately, efficient financial planning doesn't require concealing intent from the person whose signature you need, nor describing that person's trust as something to, in your son's words, use correctly. I have that on recording as well, should you like it played again. Linda's mouth pressed into a thin line. She said nothing further. They left within the hour. Mark packed 2 suitcases in near silence. Linda waited by the front door, arms crossed, refusing to look at me, until just before stepping outside she turned and said, You'll regret this. Family is family, Emily. You'll learn that the hard way, alone in this house. I already have a family, I said. The one my dad built for me. And this house is part of what he left me. Not something I'm willing to hand over to protect people who were never protecting me back. She didn't respond. The door closed behind them both, and the sound of it, quiet, final, ordinary, was somehow louder than anything that had happened all evening. I stood alone in the front hallway for a long time, then walked slowly through every room, the way you'd walk through a house you were seeing for the first time, even though nothing had physically changed. The same hardwood floors my dad would have admired. The same living room, where a small hidden camera behind a bookshelf had quietly, faithfully told the truth when no one else would. Felt like I finally understood what had been true all along, that it was mine, fully and completely, in a way it had never quite felt before that phone call, before that video, before I learned exactly what I was capable of when everything I loved was threatened. I called Walter the next morning, mostly to thank him again. He was quiet a moment, then said something I've carried with me since. Houses hold on to the truth longer than people do, Mrs. Carter. I'm just glad this one still had a little truth left to give you. I think about that often. How close I came to signing away everything my dad worked his whole life to give me simply because I trusted the wrong smile at the wrong table. How real love doesn't need to be protected through secrecy, through paperwork slipped quietly past someone who trusts you too much to read the fine print. I still live in that house. Sarah comes over most Sundays, and we sit on the porch while my tomato garden finally comes in. Danielle and I still text once in a while, 2 women who never would have met if not for the family we accidentally shared. Some mornings I sit on that porch, coffee in hand, thinking about how easily I could have lost it all, not just the walls and windows but the harder one, quieter piece of finally learning to trust my own eyes over anyone else's words. If you were in my position, I want to know, would you have handled it the same way? Or would you have confronted them the second you found out? Tell me in the comments below, and don't forget to drop your city and what time it is right now where you're watching from. I read every single comment, and I love seeing how far these stories travel. If this story moved you even a little, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and if you're new here, please subscribe. We have so many more stories just like this one waiting for you. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end.